What's up, you knuckleheads? It's Josh here, and we are back with another position rating for the Worlds 2020 tournament. I've already done a position rating for all of the ADCs at Worlds 2020. That's going to be linked right above. You can check that out for a full complete explanation for how I do these rankings. The logic and the tiers for the ratings are going to be basically the same for the junglers, just comparing jungler stats to other junglers. And I hope to do every single position before World starts on Thursday. So with that being said, let's get right into this list. Starting in the bottom tier, it is the usual suspects from the lower regions. We have Croc of the CB LOL representative Loud, the Istanbul Wildcat jungler Ferret, who I talked about at MSI and really hasn't changed much since then. And finally, in this bottom tier, the LLA representative Isurus Gaming's Follow. Not much to say about any of these players. They don't do anything particularly well. I will say that Ferret is poised to probably be the worst early game jungler at Worlds 2022, so watch his pathing if you want to understand how to get badly beat as a jungler. But let's move on to the next tier. Which again, the usual suspects we would expect there, the LGL and 2 PCS teams. We have Steel of Detonation Focus Me, Gemini of CTBC Flying Oyster, and Beyond Gaming's Husha. I will say that each of these players does have at least one attribute that they can kind of lean on. Steel is a very good defensive jungler, he doesn't die a lot and has a lot of good kill participation. Gemini as well, good defensive jungler, and fair in the early game. Husha is actually a very good early game jungler, but I think these guys are all going to just get outclassed by the better players in the higher leagues. But don't be surprised if they're going to go toe-to-toe with some of them in the playing stage. Having Closer and Malrong at the bottom of tier 3 is probably going to raise a lot of questions, but honestly both of those players are kind of overrated in my opinion compared to what they've produced. Closer is very good in the early game, but in my opinion he doesn't have as much of an impact later in the games, particularly in starting and closing out team fights. Malrong is a little bit better in that regard, and he's okay as an early game jungler, but he also has a bit of a problem with oversharing his jungle camps and not taking gold for himself. That sometimes leaves him liable to get counter jungled a bit. Above them you have Arthur, who's a very good jungler out of the LCO for Chiefs Esports. The guy put up a 6.13 KDA over the course of the year, which is absurd for a jungler, especially one who you expect to be dying a lot, and he's a very good contributor in team fighting. In addition, you have Saigon Buffalo jungler BeanJ, somebody who I was pretty high on going into MSI. I've cooled on him a little bit. I still think he's going to be pretty good and he can hold his own, but he's definitely not going to contend with the top tier junglers. And then we close out this tier with the solid but not exceptional from the LCS and LEC, which would be Jankos, Blabber, and Razork. These are all junglers who I think are very good. These guys are all going to be solid, but I don't think they're game-changing junglers like some of the people higher up in the better tiers. Speaking of the higher tiers, in that good tier, we have, no surprise, our LCS MVP Inspired, one of the few LCS players to make it into one of these top tiers. He's in the bottom of the 4th tier, which is still pretty good. He's still a very good jungler for being from NA, and we're going to see his mettle tested against some of the best players in the world. He's proven before that he's probably just a step below them, but he can still surprise, and if he gets on, he can carry games for sure for EG. We also have some of the lower tier LCK and LPL junglers like Pioshik, JJ, and incoming controversy Tian. I think he has been a good jungler this year, but he has some pretty specific weaknesses. Notably, some of his team fighting has left a lot to be desired in my opinion, but he is still an exceptional jungler, and Top Esports is going to be formidable with him in the lineup. Plus, he was very close to banking the elite tier, so it's not a knock on him to say that he's just not one of the elite junglers in the world. But otherwise in this tier we have Elyoya of the Mad Lions, who I think is a very solid and very consistent jungler out of Europe, and Gigabyte Marines Esports Levi, who's a jungler that I love watching, super aggressive, super dominant early game. I really want to see if he can show his mettle against the best junglers in the world. He has come up short in the past, but this year I have a lot of hope that he will figure it out. Then we get to that tier just below the top 3, the elite tier. These are still elite junglers. We have LCK's Canyon and LPL's Way, the Royal Never Give Up and DWG Kia junglers. No knocks against either of these two. They're both exceptional junglers. They just unfortunately fell a little bit below the top 3, who we'll get into right now. We start off with Gen G's Peanut, who I think is an incredibly good jungler. He's been consistently top tier for almost his entire career. The guy is an absolute monster. The only thing that holds him back from being number 1 in this ranking is his team fighting is just really, really rough. The guy averages only 251 damage per minute, which is way below the average for junglers, and it's not like his champion pool is particularly tank heavy, and it's not like he's dying a lot, like going in early and sacrificing himself. He doesn't die a whole ton. That's why he has such a high KDA. I just would really like to see a little bit more out of him if he wants to be in that top 1 or 2. And speaking of top 2, in that number 2 position, we have JD Gaming's Kanavi. This is a guy who is absolutely cracked when it comes to getting damage done and not dying. He averages 383 damage per minute, but under 3 deaths per game. Again, an absolutely exceptional player who doesn't really have a weakness to his game, but he still falls short of the number 1 spot, which is owned by T1 Oner. And I feel like a lot of people have just kind of forgotten about Oner for some reason. Like, he's not one of the best early game junglers in the world. He averages almost 700 gold plus experience difference at 15. He's also got a KDA above 5 and one of the highest gold per minutes of any jungler, so he is able to accumulate all of those resources and he turns it into advantages. And I know he fell off a little bit during the summer, as did T1 kind of as a whole, to be frank, but his performance in the spring was so absolutely insane. I just have to keep giving him the number 1 spot. He's just, in my opinion, a step above everybody else. But there you have it. That is my ranking of every single jungler attending Worlds 2022. Let me know who you think should be number 1 and who you think I rated too low. And I'll see you next time for our next position, which is going to be the top lane. Take it easy, knuckleheads.